Mormons claim angelic visitations as an impetus for divine revelation in their religion. Guess what? The black Hebrew Israelites do too. They talk about angels in gray suits visiting them in their kitchen and at bars to give them new revelation. Guess who else did? Muhammad, with Gabriel, supposedly, in a cave. Now, we'll talk a little about, maybe, if we get to, about angels in the Nation of Islam, but the point still stands. Abu Khamr, do you have anything you'd like to bring out in those beginning sections as we start?
It's interesting. While listening to what you were saying about the law, and you had that very quick line where you mentioned you still got to abstain from pork. It's with the Israelite groups. Now, of course, the Israelite groups run across a wide spectrum, but nonetheless, they almost all treat the Bible as scripture. You know, and the Bible that we hold to, at least the ones that affirm the New Testament. And of course, Orthodox Islam does not. They reject the Bible. Meanwhile, the Nation of Islam is sort of in a halfway point between those 2 points. They spend quite a bit of time preaching from the Bible, but at the same time, they are somewhat apathetic regarding the Bible's preservation and authority. Now, the only reason I mention that spectrum between the three is because, interestingly enough, in their polemics, the three of them all interestingly will zero in on pork of all things. And in their polemics against Christians, will try and zero in on a text like, the Matthew 5:17-18 or something to that effect, to try to argue for the entirety of the Mosaic Law remaining, even though none of them really keep that, but in its entirety. But nonetheless, just so they could wedge in, this insistence on this one particular dietary proclivity. That's where my mind was when you were going through that.
Dietary proclivity. We love some Abu Khamr. So Abu is somebody who's been following and studying the black Hebrew Israelites for a long time. He probably knows their history better than anyone I've personally ever met. And he has some knowledge on Semitic languages, and therefore is able to do some good work with not only different factions of Judaism and the Hebrew Israelites, and also Islam, and to an extent Nation of Islam. So again, perfect guy to have on today's show, and I can't wait till we get into these questions. So let's talk about similarities and differences. Abu, what's a difference between the black Hebrew Israelites and the Nation of Islam?
Oh, well, there's many. I mean, honestly, when this subject first came up, my first thought was that, in a sense, they have more differences than they do things in common. But of course, as a disclaimer, we should put this out there. The Israelite spectrum itself is incredibly diverse. I know you've said this in almost every single one of your shows on the Israelites, but it needs to be said again. The Israelite spectrum itself is incredibly diverse, so they have incredible differences amongst one another within their own spectrum. But nonetheless, mainly, for example, your book focuses on one Western, so we'll use that. A difference between many Israelites and the Nation of Islam, especially if we're comparing, say, one West Stream Israelites and the Nation of Islam, is what I would call like an inclusivist approach versus an exclusivist approach. The Nation of Islam is very ecumenical in its approach vis-a-vis the African diaspora and especially the African American community, in the sense that while people think of the Nation of Islam as a hate group, it's a very loving group vis-a-vis other African American groups. Farrakhan has been very cordial with what would be called black churches, and even certain Hebrew Israelite groups, at least those that are more inclusive in their outlook. Compare that to the one Western Hebrew Israelites. They're very exclusivist and very hostile to any group that teaches any. That's the norm amongst them anyway. Is to be hostile to anyone who teaches anything different, almost as if they see it as a competition, see it almost as a threat to their brand. So there's this extreme hostility to everyone, and that's one of the first differences that comes to mind. And in fact, I remember many years ago, Tazadakia, the leader of the Israelite Church of God in Jesus Christ, he had a video where he was mocking Farrakhan, and that was one of the points that he was mocking Farrakhan on. He was pointing out that, Farrakhan was open to African Americans not only being Muslims or members of the Nation of Islam. They could go into Orthodox Islam. He said explicitly they could be Baptists, and Tazadakia mocked that and prided himself on how he's not going to lock on arms with any other group, and so that difference stands out, that's for sure.
It's like I mean, it would take only the Black Hebrew Israelites to accuse the Nation of Islam of being too loving and too open-minded, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. Yes, yes, indeed.
It's like, seriously, man. But nonetheless, there you go. Okay, so briefly, let's say there's someone who's joining us and saying, that was very interesting what you just said, Abu, but I actually don't understand any of it because I don't know what a Black Hebrew Israelite is. Briefly tell everybody, Abu, what is a Black Hebrew Israelite in the first place?
Okay, well, as we mentioned earlier, the Israelite spectrum is incredibly diverse. The groups don't seem to agree on anything doctrinally, except for one thing, and that is the position that the African diaspora in the West, or at least African Americans specifically, are biological descendants of the true biblical Israelites. Beyond that, the different Israelite groups are all over the place ideologically, some being Tanakh only or Old Testament only, some of them affirming the New Testament, some of them denying the divinity of Christ, some of them affirming the divinity of Christ up to a point, and so on down the line. But that's the main unifying aspect of all the different groups. Beyond that, the stream or family of Israelites that both you and myself have focused on is what we call the One West stream, which is the various splinter groups that descend from a group that started in Harlem called originally the Israelite School of Universal Practical Knowledge, and then the Israeli Church of Universal Practical Knowledge. And these groups have a lot more in common. Most of them affirm what's called Lashawan Kodash, which is a unique approach to Hebrew pronunciation, which started somewhere in the early 20th century Harlem, and they affirmed a tribes chart, which is attributed to Arya, where you'll see where other Israelite groups might not recognize Native Americans or Latinos, but the One West spectrum does. They have this tribe chart where very specifically they'll say African Americans are from the tribe of Judah, and then they'll have various tribal associations for different Latino groups. They'll say Puerto Ricans are Ephraim, and Dominicans are Simeon, etc. And if you see the chart out on the street, that's a One West group. And in fact, I would say while there's a lot of diversity on the internet and behind closed doors, the only Israelites you really see on the street are from One West groups. I'm hard pressed to conjure up a memory from my mind of a non-One West group preaching on the streets, with the exception of maybe in Chicago. Like, it just seems like in every major city, when you see Israelites on the street, they're One West groups. And another thing they have in common is, of course, is a sort of King James onlyism, and they have a doctrine which maybe we'll discuss later in the show. What's known as the Esau Doctrine or Edomite Doctrine. They, aside from believing that African Americans descend from the biblical Jacob, they believe that most whites, if not all whites, descend from the biblical Esau.
Hey, while you're talking, actually, I just noticed some of the live chat conversation. There's a pretty funny conversation happening right now, Abu, about who to like better, MC Light or Foxy Brown.
That's actually a tough one. I was a fan of MC Light in my youth. But
I thought that was pretty funny. So,
I'm glad they're tackling the important questions in the chat.
We are going to get into some more details with this, but I see actually already, by the way, someone in the super chat. It's Warrior Linda Clark who says, "I love me some Galatians," and I really appreciate that, Warrior Linda Clark. You are always holding it down, and much love to you in the super chat, and anyone else who super chats. You guys are going to get much love. And so I really appreciate you guys. Again, thank you very much. And when I see we got my main man, G.I. Jr., a.k.a. Operation Apologetics in the chat. Hey, guys, go ahead and join and subscribe to his channel because he's got some great videos. His latest one is, do I need to understand Arabic to read the Quran, to talk about the Quran? It's pretty good. Miss Piggy asks us, is the BHI only in America, or are they everywhere? Well, I'll answer it briefly, and Abu, you can say something. So we're going to interact with you guys as we go along here. Miss Piggy, the Black Hebrew Israelites they began, as far as the iterations that we discuss, in Harlem in the 60s, 70s, and all that. And They were northeast centric for a very long time. But in the past 10 years, especially, their growth has exploded out into the West Coast and the Midwest, and now down into the South, into the Bible Belt. Well, not only that, but they've also grown some. It hasn't exploded as much, but it's beginning in places that especially are what you might call Western culture, but not just there. So there's some growth in Jamaica, for example, but also in the UK is a place that you see a lot of growth. And the way that you see this is new camps popping up. New camps mean new local divisions of Black Hebrew Israelites that you'll see starting to post videos and all that. And you can always get a good idea of their growth and activity and all that, oftentimes by their YouTube channels. Now, IUIC is called Israel United in Christ. They're the biggest Black Hebrew Israelite One West group, and they're the most active. They have begun over the past year something called the Booster Club, and the Booster Club specifically sends out their leaders into Ghana and other places in Africa. And so they have been going and now preaching this non-gospel message, really one of hate and exclusion to people in other parts of the world. And guess what? They're starting to buy into it, and that seems like that's a big new growth sector, at least for some of the Black Hebrews like groups. So you will start to see them be more international. I've talked to people in Canada that are starting to see them pop up. They're starting to go slowly but surely down into South America. Comment on that, Abu?
Well, yeah, no, it's certainly growing, and I think it's going to affect them because they have to sort of make decisions. I mean, the West African thing is certainly a change. I think Nathaniel, the leader of Israel United in Christ, has alluded to that indirectly when he notes that there are other One West groups that take a position that is somewhat more consistent with what was the norm with the One West, which was this idea that this almost insinuation that there are no more Israelites in West Africa. Right. I don't know if I said that explicitly back then, but now that IUIC is making inroads into West Africa, that sort of poorly thought out criticism is popping up, and of course Nathaniel is easily refuting it. But nonetheless, however poor the logic is of his critics, it nonetheless represents a sentiment of that's rooted in what was once the sort of visceral hatred for Africans that existed within One West, within the One West spectrum. I think Nathaniel's a little bit more clear thinking on that subject, and so he's bringing in more nuance.
So everyone, Nathaniel is the leader of IUIC. They're the guys who wear purple and gold. You can find their videos all over. And Gregorian in the live chat says, yeah, I've seen videos of them in the UK and in the Netherlands, and I've seen them do missionary work in Africa. That's very true. So Gregorian kind of seems to know. And Naomi asks, I'm lost. Is it Abu on the phone? Yeah, so Abu's actually joining us by Skype. And so that's why part of the screen has that. It says on the phone with Abu Khamr. And then Gregorian asks this question: how do Black Hebrew Israelites explain the loss of identity as Jews throughout history? Check this out, Abu. We're going to try to give a short answer, so I'll go first with my short answer, then you go second with your short answer. The main thing they say is that basically the devil, who really is the white man, as well as the other nations, have always hated Israel, and part of what they've wanted to do as far as to achieve these devilish purposes is to help strip away the identity of the Israelites. And in fact, in the case of some groups, specifically they point to the Jews of today, is to actually even supplant them or usurp them as the true people of God, as far as in name only, they would say, those modern day Jews, because they really call them the synagogue of Satan. So they would explain the loss of identity as something that was actually a punishment for them not keeping what they call the laws, statutes, and commandments of the Most High. And they would also actually even point to a proof text in the Bible that they sometimes use. Now, it's not a legitimate one, okay? But nonetheless, there's a passage in Jeremiah, specifically Jeremiah 17:4, and it says, you shall loosen your hand from your heritage that I gave to you, and I will make you serve your enemies on a land that you do not know, for in my anger a fire is kindled that shall burn forever. They say that is an example where it says loosen your hand from your heritage. Now that's the ESV, which they don't like. They like the KJV. But nonetheless, that's not referring to forgetting your ethnic identity. It's more referring to the promises and blessings associated with the land. And that's fulfilled when they get kicked out of the land. Abu, your turn.
No, I mean, on that subject, I think you pretty much summed it up.
Oh, well, look at this. All right. Well, thank you.
I thought it was beautiful, straight into the point.
Ashanti Cooper says both groups, he's talking about NOI and BHI, prey on black men who have a susceptibility to believe conspiracy theories. Now, I'll say something briefly about that, and then maybe you'll say something. Maybe there's some truth to that. However, I think really we should get more at the roots of identity issues. I think that's really the main appeal with the Nation of Islam and BHI. Do you want to say something briefly about that, Abu?
Well, I certainly agree with that. I think, though, another way in which both groups are attractive is that at least some of the Israelite groups, and certainly the Nation of Islam, give a sense of structure to young men who are somewhat wayward and somewhat, without guidance out there. I mean, I think for whatever the Nation of Islam's faults may be theologically, they nonetheless do have a fairly decent track record of taking young men and cleaning them up and instilling in them a sense of discipline. I think this also exists in some Israelite groups, nowhere near to the extent that the Nation of Islam. Maybe IUIC is starting to demonstrate some of that. Of course, there's others that are just completely wayward and undisciplined, like GMS probably being the most famous example.
Right. La Resistance says that GOCC cannot stand Islam. So GOCC is another Black Hebrew Israelite called the Gathering of Christ Church. And it's true that the Black Hebrew Israelite groups in general seem to despise and dislike Islam. And now one reason you could say because they're competing for similar demographics, there's probably some truth to that. One might say just because it's another religion that contradicts them or something like that. But it seems like another reason is because the Black Hebrew Israelites, they don't really act like they're afraid or intimidated by many people. But when they get around a bunch of Muslims, they kind of seem like they're afraid. I feel like there's an intimidation factor because of the numerical superiority of both Islam and Nation of Islam. Abu, do you want to comment on that?
Well, yes, undoubtedly. And not only that, here's something relevant. I don't know if anyone remembers this. I don't remember his, as they would say, government name, but there was a guy who called himself Jakim Israel a few years ago who he murdered, he was an ISIS fanboy who murdered one of his co-workers in Oklahoma. And I remember before his social media accounts got taken down, I got to take a look at his accounts. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I saw is that there was a period, notice he called himself Jakim Israel. He briefly was into an Israelite thing, and he briefly, when you could chart his progression by looking at his social media posts, he was briefly sort of a peripheral fan of specifically GMS. And then
so this is somebody who committed jihad acts of terror in what state again?
I believe it was Oklahoma.
In Oklahoma. And you're saying
I forget what his government name was. But so his social media accounts, like all murderers these days and political killers and stuff like that, his social media accounts got taken down. But I remember before I got to see his. Mm-hmm. And now the interesting thing, this is a supporter for ISIS who calls himself Jakim Israel, which is the few people who got to see that thought that was weird. But the interesting thing was there was a brief period where he was into like an Israelite thing. Mm-hmm. And then within that brief period, towards the end, he was becoming like a GMS fanboy. Now, as to be fair to GMS, he was never in one of their camps. I don't know if he ever even contacted them. Right. He was just some guy
so GMS,
who was like promoting their videos.
I got to interrupt you just because not everyone in the audience is familiar with some of the Hebrew Israelite groups. And so I really want to make sure I explain this to everyone who's not. GMS is one of the most radical Black Hebrew Israelite groups, everyone. Stands for the Great Millstone Israelites. They're the ones who wear burlap sacks and potato sacks, almost it looks like, sometimes over their clothes. So a lot of the groups can be identified by their distinctive garb, right? Roughly like denominations, Episcopalians wear this and Lutherans wear that, you know what I'm saying? Kind of like that. But nonetheless, GMS is one of the more radical groups as far as what they say, more militant, more aggressive, more assertive with their message. And so
more vile, I would even say, more promoting violence. And, just every other Israelite group tries to distance themselves from GMS, so they're generally recognized as the worst of the worst. But the point I was going to make, because this ties back into the thing about Israelites feeling somewhat intimidated around Muslims. Mm-hmm. Relevant to that, this guy Jakim Israel, towards the end of his Israelite phase, he was a fan of GMS, and then on a dime, you could see it in his account, on a dime, he abandons the whole Israelite thing, and suddenly is like a hardline Salafi. Not particularly well versed in it, but all of a sudden he's a full-on ISIS supporter.
So he seems to just like what you might call a radical, militant, aggressive religion, it seems like.
Well, here's my speculation. When I saw that, this was the first thought that came to mind for me. For someone to jump from being a GMS fan to being a fan of ISIS, GMS is a group that has openly talked about a future in which they plan on beheading people. Like, they gleefully talk about beheading people in the
And
future.
raping other
And
nations'
raping.
women in the future.
Taking
in
women
the
as
kingdom.
sex slaves and raping them. Yes. Now, I think he jumped ship because I think there's certain disturbed men who are attracted to that kind of rhetoric, that kind of idea. They like the idea of killing people and raping women. But the difference is, I think he liked ISIS better because at this stage, GMS just talks about it. ISIS actually does it.
Yeah, so
And
you get to do it now is the idea. We got to move on, but go ahead and make your final point, my man.
Well, so I see that as, when it comes to the worst of the worst, the Muslims have a far more violent track record. Now, I'm not saying this about all Muslims or all Israelites, but yes, when you get to the worst of the worst, the Muslims are obviously going to be more intimidating than the Israelites in that regard. They're far more violent.
Right.
And related to this also within the One West spectrum, as we've mentioned in previous shows, One West's history relates directly to their interactions with Muslims. You know, basically the man recognized as the founder of their group, rightly or wrongly, he died in as according to One West oral legends anyway. Abba Bivens died from injuries suffered in a brawl with Muslims.
Right. So let me briefly share a little about that. Abba Bivens is the man really credited with beginning the modern day incarnation of Black Hebrew Israelites that we deal with. Myself and Abu, that we now call One Westers. That's the variety or the sect, similar to Salafi Islam, how it incorporates an ideology within the religion. There's different types of Black Hebrew Israelites. One West is the one we're talking about. Abba Bivens really seemed to found them, and apparently he was somewhat of a boxer, and from what I've heard, he would be out there on his box. Somebody would heckle him, he would get down off his box them, knock them out, get back up on the box. And, so he had that attitude, that vibe. Well, he tried something similar, it appears, with a group of Muslims one day in Newark, New Jersey, and we don't relish in this at all, but apparently they stabbed him to death, and he died. And so some of the bad blood, literally, between Black Hebrew Israelites and, now here's the problem, no one is absolutely sure if it was the Nation of Islam or Orthodox Islam, but many of us suspect that it was Orthodox Muslims for various reasons. Now, so there it goes back. Now, guys, let me share something real briefly. We are at 65 viewers or so right now, which is pretty good. That's excellent. Let me tell you guys something. If we get to 100 tonight, which is going to be pretty hard, I know it's pretty late in some of the country. If we get to 100, I will do a freestyle to end the show. See, I've already got the beat right here. Now, some of you earlier I saw were complaining about the use of music in a backpack radio. I am sorry. Look, I do urban apologetics. I enjoy it. To me, it makes things fun. And I know sometimes the volume might be too loud. I'm still working out all those little kinks and details, but the essence is that there will be hip-hop there at various points and times. And so some of you guys have said, hey, let's get some freestyling going, in the show that way. Well, if we get 100 people at any point during tonight's broadcast, I will freestyle. Here's the beat I was thinking of using. All right. So, anyways, if we can get 100 viewers tonight, I'll freestyle. Now, here's the thing. Where do you come in with that, everybody? Here's where you come in. You need to grab this link right now and spread it all over social media. We got about a half an hour left with the show. You guys see the counter there at the top above my head. It says 40 minutes now, but I'm trying to, be conservative, whatever. And so we've got about 40 minutes left in the show. So share it. And if we hit 100 at any time during tonight's show, we'll do the freestyle. All right. So there's your encouragement to pass the show along. We got to get 100. And if we hit 100, make sure you let me know. All right. Now, with that being said, I do need to get to another super chatter. She's the person who originally posed the question. Lily R. What's up, Lily? Thank you for the super chat. And here's what she asks. How do the Black Hebrew Israelites explain when Jesus commands us to love and pray for our enemies when they preach hate? I'll say something, then Abu will say something. Number one, the Black Hebrew Israelites say we don't preach hate. We just preach love for our nation. Now, that's one thing they'll say. But really, if you start talking to them, they'll admit that they do preach hate because they'll say they do hate other nations. And what's the justification for that? That's because God Almighty, they teach, now they call him the Most High, hates other nations as well. And they'll go to Romans 9, for example, for a proof text for that, which is, because this is going to be relevant later on, everybody, Jacob I have loved, Esau I have hated. They'll use that as a proof text for that. And so they say the command to love your enemies is only people within your racial or ethnic or tribal identity. Abu.
No, I think that sums it up. They think those texts are limited to just Israel, or sometimes even just members of their group. Because as we mentioned earlier, some of the Israelite groups don't only hate people that they consider other nations, but a lot of the One Wester groups even hate other people who appear on their tribes chart. You know, they have a vile hatred for other African Americans, and this isn't all One Wester groups, but man, it seems like a lot of them. They'll
call them 2/3. They'll say those are the 2/3. That means people who are going to die. And actually, we have a parody cartoon video coming out in about a month called Party in the UPK, which is a satirical video based off a Miley Cyrus song for one of these Hebrew Israelite groups. And in it, we briefly show and make reference to the 2/3 concept and how Hebrew Israelites hate people, even of their own ethnicity, that are not followers of their religion. And I see we got some folks showing up that I haven't seen in a while, and I'm very glad to see you guys up in here. We got Tony Tabano. You're one of the best supporters we got, bro. Eddie Barija. And also, I just saw Carmel Crunk up in here. And we got GMS Winnipeg Prophets. Hey, check it out. That reminds me, GMS Winnipeg Prophets, we're glad to have you. I have great moderators, though, so if you get too out of hand, they're going to put you in timeout and kick you out. And that reminds me, pretty soon, this next week probably, everybody, I'm going to unblock all the Black Hebrew Israelites I've blocked over the past 2 years. And that's a big deal because I've got a lot of them blocked. And I'm going to make an announcement about this. But I'm going to tell everyone, hey, I'm going to give you guys all another chance. You guys can make comments on videos because you've been super foul. I'm going to let you back in, probably starting next week. And if you can control yourself, then there you are. But if not, we're going to block you all over again. But I'm going to kind of, it's almost like when Arkham Asylum in the Gotham universe of Batman, when some kind of storm happens and all the criminals get out and they run loose, and then Batman's whole rogues gallery is running around the streets of Gotham. We're going to let that happen. As long as you behave, we're not going to go block you again. So I just want to let the Hebrew Israelites watching know that. And I see we also got J-Man. What's up, J-Man? And we also got, of course, the amazing David Wood of Acts 17 Apologetics in the house. So I think this is probably a good time, my man Abu, to play the video with Farrakhan doing the Jacob and Esau thing. What do you think, bro?
Oh, yes. Yeah, we have a couple of those. I'm looking forward to whichever one you play. He's covered this subject many times. He attributes it to Elijah Muhammad, although I don't know where Elijah Muhammad has touched on this, but it's apparently a very old teaching within the Nation of Islam, and it's their concept of the Jacob and Esau narrative within Genesis 25, 26, 27, and it literally turns on its head the logic of the One Wester approach, although it may precede the One Wester approach if it goes back to Elijah Muhammad. But it's interesting to set this up. The One Westers, as was mentioned before, believe that Esau is the progenitor of white people, and Jacob is the progenitor of the people that they consider Israelites today. So certainly the African diaspora in the Americas, certainly African Americans, and then at least for One Westers, Latinos and Native Americans as well.
All right, so with that, I think that's probably a good time. Let me make sure I've got the right one queued up here. It looks like I do. Wait, I have two that are listed as Jacob and Esau. Oh, one's more. Okay, I'm going to start with the 3-minute clip first. So here, everybody, here is Farrakhan.
And the book says, the elder will serve the younger, and the stronger will serve the weaker. Here it comes now. Then Jacob, in a place called Peniel, wrestles with a man. And while he's wrestling with this man, his thigh is thrown out of place. And he wrestles all night till the breaking of day. And when the day came, he had prevailed. And he said, I have seen God face to face, and my life has been preserved. So the one that he wrestled with said, your name shall no longer be known as Jacob. Your name shall be known as Israel. Israel means the supplanter. The supplanter. When you supplant somebody, you take something that don't belong to you by devious, deceitful means. You are the original people, therefore you are the first. You are the elder. You are the stronger. But the people, they were fighting in the womb. Now I want you to hear this. Your role has been usurped. You are the original, the natural ruler, and you on the bottom. The Johnny come lately is on the top. He's the real Israel. You got it? Okay, now Jacob or Israel is going to usurp the role of God and the role of the black man. One nation is the older. That's you. Yes, sir. You're going to serve the younger. One nation is stronger, but you're going to serve that which is weaker than yourself. That's right. And then Esau comes in with the venison. And he said, Father, I bring you. He said, but, oh my God, but I can't take my blessing back. I gave it to your brother. He said, but isn't there some blessing left for me? He said, well, son, you're going to have to serve your brother. He said, but in the final analysis, the yoke of your brother will be broken. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you very much for Abu providing that clip. That's, well, good. You know what I mean by good. But can you exegete the clip? Explain it to the audience. By the way, we're up to 73 people. I might have to freestyle tonight. So again, guys, if you get 100 people tonight, I'll close the show with a freestyle. I got a beat set up, unless David Wood wants to come on a beatbox for me. And what I'll do is when I get to 100, I'll promise that I'll do a rap at the end. Here's how we get there. You've got to take the link to this show. Grab it right now. Most of you know how to do that if you're watching on YouTube. Go on your Twitter. Go on your Facebook. And you know what? Email and text message and Facebook message this to people. Go ahead. You can even do Snapchat and Instagram. But you guys are the way people know about the show. So go ahead, though. Can you explain? And by the way, after you're done, I'm going to play that other clip you have. But could you first explain what was just said there and show the contradistinction between that and the black Hebrew Israelites?
Absolutely. It's the kind of thing that would make one Western Israelites and other Israelites who support the so-called Esau Doctrine, or Esau is the white man doctrine, it would make those kinds pull their hair, literally, and because he's turning it on its head by, they hold that Esau is the white man. He's literally taking the text and treating Esau as a reference to African Americans, and Jacob is a reference to the white power structure or white people, whatever.
And he's doing that, everyone, because Jacob means like heel grabber or usurper by that. And the idea is in the womb that there's two nations fighting within the womb. Okay, this is all Romans 9 and other places, of course. And then you see as Jacob wheels and deals to steal both the blessing and the birthright from Esau. So Farrakhan is using all that. Now notice this is just pure eisegesis, no true instruction from the actual biblical text, but he's doing that to say just like the white man has stolen from the original black man throughout all the millennia that he's been around, that's proof that Jacob is the progenitor of the white man and Esau is the one who was stolen from. But explain it more a little bit, because this is the opposite of what Hebrew Israelites teach.
Yeah, I isolated the most straightforward argument, because he actually goes deeper. The one thing about the Nation of Islam, they're a lot less literalist in their approach to the Bible, and they get a lot more esoteric in terms of the way they try to wrench allegories from the text.
Right.
So what doesn't appear there is the Nation of Islam, and they attribute this to Elijah Muhammad as well, teach that Jacob in Genesis 25, 26, and 27 actually refers to Yaqub, and the whole grafting process and all that. But that's another thing. But no, nonetheless, they treat, and you can find this also on the Final Call website. It's a fairly long-standing teaching.
Final Call, Final Call is the media voice for the Nation of Islam. And if you live in a major city and you see the guys out there with the bow ties and bean pies, they usually be selling a Final Call, and so that's what that's a reference to. Go ahead.
Yes. And so the gist of it, though, is that the whole narrative, the biblical narrative about Jacob and Esau, is that when it says Jacob, it means white people, and when it says Esau, it means the African diaspora, and more specifically African Americans. That's literally a 180-degree turn from the One West position, which is that the Esau is the progenitor of whites, and Jacob is a reference to the Israelites in the Western Hemisphere, as they would call it. Although, to be fair to the Israelites, I mean, Farrakhan is somewhat inconsistent on this because there are other texts where the text will be referring to Israel, and he'll treat that as a reference to, as a prophecy or something like that about the African American experience. So, for example, he'll often talk about separating from Pharaoh. They say, that Moses is, the new Moses is going to take us out of Pharaoh's, out of Egypt and all that. So there's other times where he'll apply Israel to the African American experience. In fact, interestingly enough, I was watching a video recently where he declared, he said that Elijah Muhammad used to call Martin Luther King one of Pharaoh's top magicians.
Really? I didn't know that. Okay. That's... I don't know why that seems so funny to me.
Yeah, and he says that, and then he goes, "What?" Because he knew others would be shocked by that. That's good, man. That actually comes up in that YouTube clip I sent you. But yeah, no. Anyway, but yeah.
All right. Well, that's
maybe it doesn't. No, I'm mistaken about that. It doesn't come up in that. But nonetheless, it's out there.
Well, okay. So within that, we're getting a lot of questions. Do you see any that you caught particular? Before maybe I play this other clip, anything like that?
Not that I see, but feel free to grab any question that you think is relevant. What I was going to say real quick before they watch this clip, listen for him when he says literally Israel is the white, is all white people or something like that. This is literally, turning on its head the One West approach, which says that Esau is, the progenitor of white people. And Farrakhan just says it bluntly in this next clip.
Okay, well, let me set this one up here, and some people are commenting on merely the rhetorical style of Farrakhan. I don't know if everyone has heard him speak before, but yes, he does invoke a tradition of black rhetoric within black churches. That is a style. I think by and large you could say that he speaks under, and it kind of almost makes the transition for some people out of the traditional black church into the Nation of Islam perhaps easier. I don't know if you want to comment on that while I get this set up, Abu.
I'm sorry. Oh, about his style. Well, the Nation of Islam, I guess, starting with Elijah Muhammad and some of their other ministers. Note the fact that they call them ministers. It did come out of a Christian environment, probably somewhat of a Protestant environment, but what people call the black church or something like that. So yeah, I think the style is deliberate because the Nation of Islam originally, and this is the same with the Israelites, they started out trying to pick off Christians, trying to go to stand outside churches, and you even see that in the Malcolm X film. There's one point where he's preaching right outside a church, if I recall.
As people are coming out, you got Malcolm X, Denzel, of course, and he's talking to people in a very kind of charming, kind of disarming way, trying to get them over to the Nation of Islam. And that's what actually first got my attention to the Hebrew Israelites. They were busting in churches and interrupting service. So let's play this clip more, Farrakhan on Jacob and Esau. And again, everybody remember, what the black Hebrew Israelites do when they go to Romans 9 is they take a couple of these passages. For example, Romans 9:4. They are Israelites, and to them belong the adoption, the glory, the covenants, the giving of the law, the worship, and the promises. To them belong the patriarchs, and from their race according to the flesh is the Christ who is God over all, blessed forever. Amen. Now, they take that to show that the exclusive nature of Yahweh's relationship to Israel, right? That's what they do there. But then they don't just stop there. And remember, this is all hinged upon the false presupposition that black Americans in the Western Hemisphere, so not just black Americans, but people who are of African descent in the Western Hemisphere are not actually of African descent. They're actually of Hebrew Israelite descent. So that's hinged on that false presupposition, because if everything they were saying was true, in reality, we know that that would just mean they're kicking themselves out of the kingdom. So we're glad their message is false, even just for their own sake. But now look at Romans 9:13. As it is written, Jacob I have loved, but Esau I have hated. Now, briefly, I want to say something. For example, here I am. I use the ESV Study Bible. That's what I got right here. Let me just show you one little thing they say about it, because sometimes that can be startling. Now, I don't want to get bogged down actually in that, but my point is to show that they use that to say Esau is a progenitor of white folks, and so even God hates white people. That's the import of their interpretation. But I like what it says here in the ESV Study Bible. The citation of Malachi 1, 2, and 3, that's what that's from, actually, everybody, just so you know, also shows that God set his saving love on Jacob and rejected or hated, as it says here, because we got to deal with this passage somehow. Esau. Hated is startling, but as a sinner, Esau did not deserve to be chosen by God, who remains just in not choosing everyone. The salvation of anyone at all comes only from God's mercy. Now, I know some people in the audience won't exactly agree with that interpretation. Hey, I'm just reading the ESV Study Bible note, though, everybody. So with that, let me play the next clip here.
And look what the Lord said. He said, 2 nations are in your womb.
God Almighty.
From one father.
Yes, sir.
2 nations. Then it said, 2 peoples shall be separated from your body, and one people will be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. The older will serve the younger. See, it's talking about the beginning of the white race coming out of us. And they are the younger. We are the elder. But who's serving who? And they are naturally weaker, but the stronger is being subjected to the weaker. Israel don't represent Jews. Israel represents the whole white race.
Hear that?
You are the God, the original man that he was struggling with.
That's right.
And ever since he's been on the planet, he's been struggling with God. Now here's this Jacob stole the birthright of his brother.
That's right. That's right.
And here's a people that stole your birthright and are running around like they are the chosen of God, and the choice of God is sitting under their foot.
Thank you again. These clips are very, very insightful. Now, let me show a couple things here before, again, Abu comes in to exegete this. First of all, one question sometimes people ask here, what are the differences between Islam and the Nation of Islam? Just watching that clip, I'm sure you can see this Nation of Islam may have Islam in the name, but this is very different than Islam. It is unorthodox, to say the least. You could almost call it a heretical cult of Islam, although sometimes there's aspects of it that really make it almost seem like it's a heretical cult of Christianity. I'm not saying it's Christian or Islam. I'm saying sort of the genesis or foundation as we look at it, like, what kind of heresy is it, you know? And so watching that, yes, the style is different. Yes, the dress is different. But really, the message and the approach is different. Isn't this much, much different than Islam? If you've seen any sermons by imams or sheikhs in mosques, or even Muslims as they do dawah in different settings, you could tell this is something different here. But someone earlier was talking about what's the appeal or the attraction then of Black Hebrew Israelites in the Nation of Islam. Let me stop real quick and say something again. I'm going to hand it back over to Abu. Notice the nation in the Nation of Islam. And notice the 12 tribes chart in Black Hebrew Israelism. Why do I bring those two things up? It's a way to bring in identity. The 12 tribes chart is supposed to signify a group of people that are a nation together that need to be regathered. And the Nation of Islam is supposed to be a distinct nation, supposedly built on the principles of Islam. Really, it's based upon the teachings of Elijah Muhammad, ultimately, and I think really that's even what they would say. But notice both are trying to forge a separate, distinct identity of a nation. Now, why is that? And this was hinted at in the clip. Imagine being black in America, and for years, your ancestors have contributed in a positive way to this country, and yet you can't reap the benefits and the rewards. Think about that. You know, you're out in the cotton fields slaving, but what are you provided with? Just barely enough sustenance to survive so you can slave again the next day. And the list goes on of the ways that you're forced to contribute and yet really are barred for access from even the simplest things in life. A water fountain, a bathroom that's better. You know, you have to go to a lesser one is what I'm saying by that. And you may say, well, that's the past. Guys, this is not that long ago. And not only that, I think we all understand how the past has ramifications for the present. So within that, if you read A Final Call, it'll say, here's the demands of what we want from our nation. And Black Hebrew Israelites are constantly talking about their kingdom and the rules that are going to be established in their kingdom and how they're building, preparing for a nation. Think about how attractive it is to say, forget about this nation. It hasn't given you anything what it promised. It's a lie. They've locked us out. We're not even considered full people according to the original founding documents of this nation. Forget all that. We are never supposed to be a part of it anyway. We have our own now, though, including a proper identity. Instead of being forced upon another identity, some N-word or some other identity that someone else is calling us, here's who we really are. We're the original man. We're the Israelites from the Bible. Now you have a new identity that you've chosen, and you have a new nation that you're working towards to bring together that. And you think about that, that's very attractive, especially to the disenfranchised. And I want people to realize that. Now, I'm not saying these cults are true, but they're working on a need, a felt need. And so that's very important. Hey, guys, listen, share this link. We've only got 15 minutes left. We still need 20 more people to get to 100 before I can do a freestyle. So go in your Facebook groups and share it. Even if we hit 100 for 1 minute, I'll do it. Abu, break it down, brah.
I was going to say real quick on the tribal thing. The sort of national or tribal affiliation. I mean, notice Nation of Islam literally calls itself a nation, and and they claim to be from the tribe of Shabazz, and I think a lot of people found that attractive and continue to find it attractive. But the interesting thing is the tribe of Shabazz is almost purely unattested. I mean, meanwhile, if you say you're descent from Israel, you're connecting yourself with the central player in one of the most popular book in human history. And so if the tribe of Shabazz rhetoric was attractive to some young men, you could see how the corresponding Israelite claim is going to be exponentially more attractive along those lines.
Right. Do you want to say anything else about that clip? But before you do, shout out again to the super chatters. Grandma in the super chat. Thank you so much, Grandma, and I hope that your new grandbaby came today nice and healthy. And she says, I'm new to this topic. It's very interesting. God bless you, VOCAB and Abu. And yes, it is new to some people, but realize these issues are very pertinent in certain communities. Now, some people may not have access or be aware or familiar with these communities, but they're very, very relevant in those communities. And that's where missionary work comes in. What I mean is part of being a missionary, and in this case it's an urban missionary, is to understand the culture, right, of the folks you're going to evangelize and witness to, before you just go in there. And so part of what we're trying to do is help you to understand when you're out on the street or when you speak to somebody who's also affected by these issues as well. And I want to give a shout out to another super chatter, Olga 2018. Thank you very much. She wants to ask a question, and I'll ask it now, but then we'll get to it in a second. How does Farrakhan justify the scripture on Christ? Thank you, Olga, for that question. How does Farrakhan justify the scripture on Christ? So, Abu, break down anything that you've seen going on in the comments or anything I commented on or on that clip I just played.
Well, I mean, the clip is, I think we've pretty much covered it with the clip. Regarding Farrakhan and Jesus, I saw a couple of people have asked this question. The interesting thing about the Nation of Islam is, at least in my discussions, both with members of the Nation of Islam and members of the offshoot, which is known as the 5% Nation of Gods and Earths, typically called the 5%ers, is while on the one hand they'll point to men who they, in one or sense or another, refer to that person as God, it's interesting that when it comes to Jesus, sometimes they sort of reflexively revert back to the standard Islamic claim that, Jesus wasn't God. So it becomes interesting if every member of the, of your group is God, whether collectively or individually, but Jesus isn't God. Although if you press them on it, they'll say, yeah, Jesus is God the same way.
Right. So that's what does the Nation of Islam mean when they say the black man is God? What do they mean by that?
Oh, it's honestly, I find this to be a very difficult subject because I think the Nation of Islam, from moment to moment, is at times seemingly theistic. Like, for example, Farrakhan on many occasions has talked about praying. He's a man who prays. He gets up in the morning, and said since the time of Malcolm X, he used to get up for Fajr. And but on the other,
sorry, so it made me think of Islamicize me.
I know, yes. But if praying is better than burning, So on the one hand, they do have a standard theistic position if you're praying, but on the other hand, the Nation of Islam has a very long history of denying the existence of a classical conception of God, and it's borderline atheist. Like, you'll often see members of the Nation of Islam flat out say that they refer to like a classical conception of God as the spook God. They'll say there's no spooky spirit in the sky, there's no spook in the heavens, and so. Since the time of Fard Muhammad, the teachings that are attributed to Fard
Muhammad...
Hold
on, real quick. Fard Muhammad, everybody, is the official founder of the Nation of Islam, different than Elijah Muhammad. And there's a lot there about Fard Muhammad. We can't get into it, but that's when he says, when he's talking about Fard Muhammad. Go ahead, Abu.
He was like Elijah Muhammad's teacher. And so in his teachings, he has this thing where he'll talk about, that he'll say that, the black man is God, they'll say, and he seems to use it collectively somehow. Other members of the Nation of Islam have done this sense where they'll allude to each individual human being a god. There's a brilliant scholar within the Nation of Islam who I find very interesting, named Wesley Muhammad. He talks about the democratization of divinity within the Nation of Islam.
Oh, wow.
Which is an interesting concept. But I sincerely believe they're still grappling with this from time to time, because on the one hand, you're denying the existence of a so-called spook god, but on the other hand, you're praying. On the other hand, they also... Now, this is apparently a teaching that came about after Fard Muhammad disappeared, but the Nation of Islam, at least that's the way it seems from our extant literature, the Nation of Islam has come to refer to Fard Muhammad as the man who was Allah who came in the person of Fard Muhammad. So in some sense, Fard Muhammad is also Allah. Now, if I may, I want to make a connection with the Mormons real quick.
Bring it out.
While the Nation of Islam's concept of gods and men differs, it's not the same as the Mormons. The Mormons literally believe that men become gods with their own universes and followers and all that, and that's not quite what the Nation of Islam believes. There is sort of this parallel blurring of lines. Now, I mention this because the Mormons and the Nation of Islam will both assert that, let's say, there's a God over this world, and that God was created by another God. And that God, in turn, was created by another God. And you sort of get this causal chain. Now, people who do missionary work to Mormons will sometimes press the issue and say you can't have an infinite regress of gods. There has to be a first God. And why don't we recognize that as, the true God?
Right.
And, of course, some particularly intelligent and perhaps even mystical, I guess, Mormons will dispute the claim that you can't have an infinite regress of gods. They'll say, no, you can. Why can't you have an infinite regress of gods? Which is why, for example, James White has said that Mormons literally believe in an infinite number of gods. Now, that's not the only reason I bring that up is because it's not the case with the Nation of Islam. They don't believe in an infinite regress of gods because Elijah Muhammad taught that there was a creator God who created this universe. And he says that God, so there was a first God, but he said that God died long ago.
Wow.
So they believe in gods. There is a first God, but that God died, and ever since then, there's been gods who have been born and died, and
so
Fard Muhammad somewhere within that chain.
Gods can die. Briefly, again, we are winding down. So briefly, we're actually getting close to 100. So this might actually happen. I don't know. We'll see. I'm going to keep my word, guys. I'm not going to do it unless we do hit the 100. But you notice in there, he was talking about, the creation of the white race. He mentioned that in that Jacob Esau passage. I know the story, but can you briefly share the story of how that works, Abu, as far as in their understanding of the Nation of Islam, that is?
Elijah Muhammad taught that there was an evil scientist named Yaqub, which is Yaqub is the Arabic word for the Arabic equivalent of Jacob.
He had a big head.
2 brains. I don't recall if the Nation of Islam taught that. I know that maybe they did. I know that came up in the iconography of, for example, the Dr. York's group, whatever of its many names, the Ansar Allah community or the Holy Tabernacle.
The
Nuwabians. They had so many names. But yeah, in their iconography, they depicted Yaqub with 2 brains. But whatever the case, Elijah Muhammad taught that there was an evil scientist who created the white race through a process of what they call grafting. And what he taught basically was that you had a point where every human being was what we would call black. And slowly, through a process of lightening certain descendants of them, they created the so-called brown race, and then the red and the yellow people, and so on. And then finally, they isolated it perfectly, where they created a truly evil and truly colorless race. And so it doesn't come up in the clips we showed, but if if anyone wants to search on YouTube for Farrakhan on Esau and Jacob, you'll see that he'll take a very allegorical and esoteric approach to the Genesis narrative and treat the stories as referring to Yaqub grafting human beings until arriving at the white race.
Right. Well, you know what? There's a lot of good questions. I wish we could get to all of them. We might have to do this topic again, or maybe if I feel like being nice, we might make the show go over just a little bit, a tad. But you say what?
I said I'm fine with that. I can certainly, as long as you need it to go.
Okay, so within that though, people are Lily specifically was asking about books on this topic. She asked about my book and what it says. Some of this is discussed in my book, but not really the Nation of Islam stuff. But you know what? Whenever I have a question about this, as far as books, here's who I am.
I'm the nigga that Mac attack backpack with this sack reacts. I'm like a maniac. I got stacks of facts to keep you all on track.
It looks like the backpack has provided us with some resources on books. Let's check it out and find out what it's telling us we should look at if we want some great resources on this topic. Thanks, backpack. Oh, look. Here's 4 books right in here. Magic! Oh, wow. Let's look at a few of these books together, everybody. The first is called The Changing Face of Islam in America by Poston and Ellis. Carl F. Ellis Jr. is one of my favorite authors. And chapter 12 is why I wanted to recommend this book. It has a chapter called Reaching African American Muslims. That's a book I would recommend everybody get, because it's a basic introduction, but also it's got some specialized contextual things. Here's another book the backpack recommends. It's one of the older editions of The Kingdom of Cults by Walter Martin. Now, perhaps you've seen the newer edition. This is good, but it doesn't have as an extensive entry upon black Muslims as the older version. So get an older version, because not only does it has that, but right after that, in this particular one that I've got by Dr. Walter Martin, chapter 12 was the Black Muslim Cult, but right after that is Anglo-Israelism. And that is helpful because it helps you learn about the white version of Black Hebrew Israelism. Those are great. Those are both kind of apologetic Christian books. Here's two that are more academic. Okay, they're not from a Christian perspective, but they have a lot of good, helpful information. So this is heavier reading than these other two. I recommend those other two first, but if you want to do more of an academic approach, here's one. Black Muslim Religion and the Nation of Islam, 1960 to 1975 by Edward Curtis. This is from the University of North Carolina Press. A lot of information here, and here is one that takes it to a next level. Islam and the Black American, Looking Forward to the Third Resurrection. This is actually on Oxford, this one. And there's a lot
Sherman
of
Jackson,
stuff here.
right?
This is, of course, written by Sherman Jackson. So there's some. Thank you, Backpack. We appreciate that. What were you about to say, Abu?
No, I was. You confirmed it. I was just asking. That last one is by Sherman Jackson, who's actually himself is an Orthodox Muslim, and he's a quite interesting gentleman. You know.
Right. All right. So, what questions do you see in here that you think we need to bring up here?
I don't know. I think the questions I sort of lost track of them because there was quite a bit of praise for the backpack. So.
Drakar Dragon says, every cult and heresy begins with a misconception on the nature of God. That's good. La Resistance. Oh, as an ex-GOCC follower, I thank you, VOCAB MALONE Abu Khamr, for this podcast. Please do more in the future, as this is most fascinating. We have a former that's amazing. So, La Resistance, may I ask you if you could comment in the live chat, I see your ex-GOCC, and that's excellent. What have you embraced since then? Have you come to Christ? Do you believe that Jesus Christ is God? Do you believe the gospel, the good news about Jesus Christ? Where are you at currently? I would love to hear. What do you believe now? I'm glad you've left GOCC, but I hope that you still have a faith in God's word. But at the same time, be honest. I would like to hear where you're at in your journey. La Resistance. That's interesting that we've got an ex-GOCC in here, don't you think, bro?
Absolutely.
And then, we got Built for Speed. Shout out to you. Nice. Someone you may know says, well, two brains are better than one.
It's really touche.
So do you think there's more similarities or differences when it comes down to it as far as the Nation of Islam and Black Hebrew Israelites?
Oh, I think there's more differences. I mean, they have different approaches to Scripture. They have drastically different conceptions of God, different attitudes to ecumenism, and it seems to me there's quite a bit of difference. You know.
Wow, guess what La Resistance answer was? You just made my week. Now I am a Reformed Baptist. Much love to you. That is amazing to hear. Awesome. Praise God. Apparently, we got some people who are tired of me. Melody Malone says, can we hear more from Abu? Why is it important to address and become apologist to Black Hebrew Israelites? Okay, Abu, I'll be quiet.
I would like to address that, if I may. Well, I would say this. I think any group out there, or any ideological movement which runs contrary to Christianity, it's important to address it. And so I wouldn't say that the Israelite movement is necessarily more important than Mormons or Jehovah's Witnesses or new atheists and so on. But nonetheless, I think the apologist community, those who engage in apologetics, should attempt to span out into a spectrum and each deal with the field that he's capable of dealing with, whether it be atheism, whether it be Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, so on down the line, Orthodox Islam. And so each has a niche, and I think as far as discussions on the street, one Western Hebrew Israelites are quite prominent. They're seemingly ubiquitous on the streets of major cities, and so I mean, honestly, I have some very nice Jehovah's Witnesses that come to my door. But that aside, I feel like in the major cities, I see one Westers more than I see any other group.
Yeah.
As far as preaching on the street. So they have a presence, and just as the other groups should be responded to, they should be responded to. Those who are interested in the subject, should learn about them and learn arguments to approach them. But I wouldn't say they're necessarily more important than any other major group out there, like the groups that I mentioned.
Yeah, that's good. We have people arguing also about the Trinity in the live chat, but I really don't want to do that or get into that right now because it is a little bit off from what we're discussing.
Yeah.
I mean, we discussed that plenty of times. We got lots of videos and stuff like that. Don't get me wrong, everybody, but we're not necessarily doing that today. And it looks like we.
Although, actually, I'll
ahead.
say this, mildly relevant to the Trinity, mildly
Go ahead.
relevant, at least insofar there's a question about the conception of God. Earlier, I mentioned there's a brilliant. I consider him brilliant. I know there's those who are aware of him. There's plenty of people who don't like him. I find him interesting, even if I don't necessarily agree with him on a lot of things. There's a brilliant scholar within the Nation of Islam who I mentioned before, Dr. Wesley Muhammad. He actually has a PhD in Islamic Studies, I believe, from the University of Michigan, and he's quite interesting insofar that the Nation of Islam since the 70s has had to contend with Orthodox Muslim missionaries trying to pick them off, constantly trying to funnel away their members from the Nation of Islam into Orthodox Islam. And there's some very high-profile members who went. The most famous is Malcolm X. And then, of course, another famous member of the Nation of Islam is the son of Elijah Muhammad, Wallace Muhammad, who later became Imam Waraquddin Muhammad. He took the Nation of Islam into an Orthodox position. And Farrakhan wound up breaking away and going back to the teachings of Elijah Muhammad. So I mention this because there is this sort of stereotype for people who are familiar with the interplay between Orthodox Muslims and the Nation of Islam. There is this sort of stereotype that the Nation of Islam is terminally ignorant of the Quran and and therefore are totally unprepared for standard Orthodox Muslim polemics against them and arguments for the Orthodox position. Now, I mention this because there has been what's basically a Nation of Islam counter-missionary, and it's this aforementioned scholar, Wesley Muhammad. Now, I mention him because he's tried to tackle the subject of the conception of God within the Quran, and some of his stuff is really interesting. He has a lecture called Philology in the Quran or something like that. You can check on YouTube for Wesley Muhammad Philology. It's really interesting, some of the stuff that and also in his writings. Like, for example, he's one of the people that, and for me, this sort of it ushered in a paradigm shift for me. The Quran is very clear that there's only one God. Yet the Quran also uses a number of plural constructions in reference to God. And so that begs the question, how do you explain these plural constructions? Ask any Orthodox Muslim and they'll say, oh, that's a plural of majesty. It's a royal plural, nothing more. Wesley Muhammad has raised the point that while that's the standard position, there doesn't seem to be any textual indicators in the Quran itself which necessitate that. And so he's argued indirectly, and I think it's a very interesting point, and Christians should consider this interesting as well, is that if there's no clear textual indication in the Quran itself necessitating that the plural constructions are merely metaphorical, it raises the question, might we interpret the Quran as insinuating a multi-personal conception of God? Wesley Muhammad has argued for such, although, not 3 persons. He's argued for, I believe, 24 persons in God, but whatever the case, the point is that he's raised some very interesting points, and I think Christians can do well to take a peek at that, because he's sort of ushering in a bit of a paradigm shift in how people should, how trusting they should be of the Orthodox reading of the Quran, because,
Right. Agreed. Well, we're technically at the end of the show, Abu. Technically. And we got up to 91 people, but we never.
I think we both can run our mouths more if we have to. I mean, if you want to give them a chance, but no.
So I see some great comments still going on here. I think what we'll do is this. I'll allow us to go a little bit longer. I'll set the timer for 10 more minutes, and then we'll need to end in 10 minutes. And it looks like we even have a Mormon in the chat. Wow.
Since we did mention Mormons.
Yeah, that's amazing. And again, some pretty good comments. One person asked, let me find it here. Let me see what other comments. Oh, Lily thinks I need to do a book club. What do you guys think? Do we need to do a VOCAB Malone Backpack
I think
Radio
that's
Live?
a great idea. I meant to say that Lily has a great idea there. I think that's great, where you do shows where you recommend a new book on a subject and discuss it for an hour or something like that.
Oh, Joe Cool McCall wants to know if Abu Khamr has a blog or podcast. He's quite articulate and interesting to see how he views topics.
Yeah, I don't have a blog or podcast at the present moment. I just have my YouTube page, which unfortunately I have not been very active on it. I will try to be more active in the future.
Go ahead and shout out the YouTube page name, bro.
It's Abu Khamr al-Masihi, ABUKHAMRALMASEEHEE. I mean, just put in Abu Khamr and you'll be able to find it. ABUKHAMR. You do a search for that in YouTube and you'll find my pages.
Roxby agrees with the book club idea. I don't know what to see about that. I'll talk to my Patreons since I see some of you here.
If you think about it, some of the books that you have in your collection, a lot of them you could just pick one, and quite a lot could be said on it. For example, Black Judaism. You have that book. I honestly believe that we could sit down and it doesn't have to be me. It could be somebody else, but you could sit down and start discussing interesting things in Black Judaism. You know, and there'd be a lot to say.
Yeah.
You know?
The Mormon Dr. Phobos says we are everywhere and we bring castle rolls. I thought that was the Southern Baptist. Oh, look, we got Deanne Guild from South Africa. All right, guys. Well, I'll let you guys go. We'll go 10 more minutes here then. Okay, what else do we got here? Somebody, Gregorian, was asking about, are there white folks who believe in Black Hebrew Israelite ideas? So
Yes.
briefly, let me break something down here, Gregorian, to everybody else who's interested in that question. A few things. One is, as I mentioned briefly when I brought up the Walter Martin book, that prior to Black Hebrew Israelism, there was something called Anglo-Israelism. And so some of those same concepts, just obviously from a different vantage point, were present in a religion or ideology prior. Before the old school Worldwide Church of God, actually under Armstrong, used to have Anglo-Israelite teaching as an undercurrent. Some of that's changed, some of it hasn't. It's a long story, but there's other groups or teachers of this. There's, Christian versions of Anglo-Israelism. So there's one way to answer that question. Another way to answer that question is there's actually a small group of white folks. When I say group, they're scattered abroad here and there, who actually say, yes, I accept the teachings of the Black Hebrew Israelites, and I realize that I'm a wicked Edomite. And basically, they'll say, and I hope to have a decent place as a slave in the kingdom. Every now and then you'll run into those kinds of guys. They'll put out a YouTube video or they'll say something similar on the street. Now, granted, that's a minority of people, but they do exist. More prominent, though, is the other group, Abu. What's the other kind of white person who's a Hebrew Israelite? Can you explain that to the audience?
Sure. Well, let's how about this? Go to now. I'm not saying you go to it, but for anyone who's interested, if you go to Revelation 7, the 7th chapter of Revelation,
I'm here.
There's this talk about after it mentions the different tribes, the 12,000 from each tribe. It gets into how they see a number of people that cannot be counted from every nation and linguistic group. I forget the verse off the top of my head. I don't have it in front of me.
Revelation 7:9, bro.
Okay, so do you want to read it or?
Yeah. After this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, with palm branches in their hands, and crying out with a loud voice, Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb.
And so that, I think a lot of people, when they deal with one Westers, they think that pretty much refutes the one Westers who are exclusivists. And say, well, there you go, those are saved Gentiles. Could you also read Deuteronomy 28:64?
Yes, which, by the way, I do think that verse pretty much does refute one Westers. Just so everyone knows, one time it'd be great to do a Bible study on those passages in Revelation. Now here's Deuteronomy 28:64. And the Lord will scatter you among all peoples from one end of the earth to the other, and there you shall serve other gods of wood and stone, which neither you nor your fathers have known.
Okay, so now the thing is, so this verse in Deuteronomy predicts the Israelites will be scattered into every nation, and they use that sort of idea to explain texts which seem to show saved Gentiles. They say, no, those are Israelites. And so, for example, a number of the groups have said that these people that you see in Revelation 7 are just Israelites who look like the other nations, or at least have the culture of the other nations. As a result, the logical conclusion of that, plus the logical conclusion of the assumption that you are an Israelite as long as your paternal line goes back to Jacob, that sort of opens the door to the idea that you can have people who are Israelites who look like anything. And as a result, GMS has taken this to its logical conclusion and let in people that would be considered white, but they consider them Israelites. They treat them as Israelites. And there've always been people who have, ever since they've allowed in, like, let's say, Puerto Ricans and stuff like that, there's always been people who are particularly European in their morphology. And so now they've gone all the way to letting in white people who claim to be Israelites under certain conditions. In GMS, they claim they're reading these guys' spirits and figuring out that they're Israelites. Here's an interesting little bit of trivia. Earlier, VOCAB, you mentioned that what got you interested in this subject is a certain One West group busting into churches and disrupting services and arguing with the pastor and all that. The guy leading that was a white Hebrew Israelite.
Yes, he was. And I have videos on my channel, everybody, where I'm showing videos of him talking. So I know it gets confusing, but here's what, if you guys stick with my channel and you stick with these broadcasts, here's what's going to happen. Because I know at first you're like, whoa, what are we doing here? You're going to, first of all, learn more about Islam, because I'm not going to leave that topic alone. But David and Anthony are going to specialize in that. It's going to be part of what I do, but not all of what I do. Here's what's going to happen. Little by little, you're going to start to realize I'm learning more about Judaism and Hebrew Israelism and black nationalist groups like the Nation of Islam because of the things VOCAB is integrating into here. You're going to learn some of the urban apologetics side. And some of you may say, that doesn't seem important, but here's what will happen. I believe if you stick with this channel and watch it, God will bring people into your life where you realize this information that you've been getting all of a sudden was valuable. That's what's going to happen to a lot of you. And so I encourage you to stick around. And besides, it's part of learning and growth, and there's nothing wrong with that, even if God would not do that. But I believe God will prepare you guys for this, because these things are growing, not shrinking, as divisions increase in our world and all that. Now within that, let me say a few things. I've got some videos also where I'm with white GMS Black Hebrew Israelite members out on the streets of Columbus. This happened last year during the summer, actually, of July. And I'm actually going to post those sometime in the next 2 weeks, because it's kind of a flashback. It happened a year ago. It'll be me out on the street talking to these guys, and you'll say, isn't that guy a white guy? Now, he makes jokes about it. Sometimes he says I'm light-skinned, but really what it is they actually teach, no, you are a Hebrew Israelite, but through the dispersal and going through different nations and all that, now you look different, but you're actually ethnically an Israelite, and as Abu mentioned, we can read your spirit to attest to that. So there's a subjective epistemological aspect to that as they realize the truth about their lineage. Now, GMS is the group that most likely will do that. So GMS, you can see lots of guys who clearly look white, yet they'll be condemning white people, is the irony out on the street. I'll show you some videos from that. And watch out when you do watch those. There will be foul language in those. As we deal with Hebrew Israelites, you guys will notice there will be foul language. And I'm just not going to go through and bleep them all. But most of you can deal with that and handle that and understand the context of that. It won't be on my part, by the way, the foul language. But I'll post those soon, so you'll see. Watch out for that, everybody. Also, we have La Resistance, who made my day, as I mentioned, by saying you're a Reformed Baptist now, because that's sort of the tradition I flow in, the London Baptist Confession of 1689, although, because I'm associated in some ways with a sovereign grace type of idea as well. By that I mean the denomination as such, the Reformed Charismatic. I'm not sometimes a lot of the Reformed Baptists would kind of reject me because I'm a continuationist of sorts. Nonetheless, he said he was part of GOCC. Well, GOCC, they actually teach that white people can be in their camp, in their group. They just have to have a lesser role. So they can't teach black Hebrew Israelites, for example, as white members, but they can come to the feasts and Passover and eat with them and even be fellow brothers. And their slavery is for more of a nice indentured servitude versus the hardcore slavery that groups like ISUPK and GMS, teach. And so I know it's a lot, but you guys, what I said, if we cover this more, you're going to start to catch on to it. With that, Abu, I'm actually going to let you kind of share some final thoughts, because we
real quick, since you mentioned La Resistance, I noticed someone whose name is Awesome Possum wrote at VOCAB, I'd be happy to teach you about Judaism, a religion I left a few weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
I thought that was interesting. I'd be curious which worldview Awesome Possum has embraced in place of Judaism.
Yeah, Awesome Possum. Again, if you feel free to share, we would love to know where you are now as far as your beliefs. And oh, Abdul S just showed up. Abdul, we mentioned how in prior broadcasts, because I haven't seen you around, you could come on as we do the new Backpack Radio shows. Well, this is the first week of the shows. We did one on Tuesday, one on Thursday. And now that we're in this new phase of doing Backpack Radio Live and Backpack Radio Live Q&A, you could come on. Abdul, can you contact me somehow through social media? The messenger function is going to start to go away here in YouTube, so you can try that. But if not, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, and Periscope, all the things, YouTube, just simply as VOCAB Malone, VOCAB MALONE. Hit me up so we can set it up, because I would like to have you come on. Because Abdul here is actually saying Abdul Khamr is heavily ignorant of the Quran. If he wants to argue multi-person to God from the Quran, God Almighty says, do not say three, and he is but one God. So you've got your detractors. Again, we're not going to get too much into that, but Abdul, the offer is extended. Abu, what are your final words here on today's show?
Just that this was a broad subject, and a lot more could be said on it. I mean, if we were only going to compare Orthodox Islam to the Nation of Islam, we could spend many shows discussing it, and so too if we were going to compare either one of them to the various Israelite groups. So there's a lot more that could be said. It's a broad subject, but it was a lot of fun discussing it. And
yeah, and I hope I can have you on
Twitter
as
up,
a somewhat regular. Sorry, you're breaking up there. I hope that I can have you on as a somewhat regular guest, because we have good chemistry. We're friends. We talk a lot on the phone, and our interests, more than almost probably anyone I know, are almost, they're not identical, but they definitely overlap between Black Hebrew Israelism, Islam, Nation of Islam, and other urban apologetic issues. There's a thousand ways of all the stuff that I want to discuss on the channel. You kind of know, and so I hope that we can do this again.
Absolutely.
And people seem to like it, bro. They told me to shut up. They wanted to listen to just you.
I certainly enjoyed discussing this, but I think we're all just students of these subjects.
Cheryl R. says, VOCAB Malone, thanks to you, Act 17 Apologetics, and what do you mean? I've never heard of the BHI before. Islamicize me. And yes, if you guys have watched Islamicize me, be sure to watch the episodes where we go out on the street and interact with the Black Hebrew Israelites, and you notice they don't really say too much to our Muslim characters, right? But I'm going to put up some videos on my channel in the next 2 weeks, as I mentioned, where you'll see me on the street in real life discussing some things with Black Hebrew Israelites, and the conversations will be very, very interesting. So I look forward to that. I think we've hit all the super chatters. I don't think we got to our 100. We got right to 91, so that's good. But in the future, everybody know that I have 2 ways I'm going to do it, and here's going to be the 2 ways I'm going to do it. On the Tuesday show, which is every Tuesday at 4 o'clock East Coast time on Backpack Radio Live, when I do those programs, I'm going to make it be called the $50 freestyle. And so if we can get to $50 in the super chat, then I'll do a freestyle. But on the Thursday nights, since I think it's a goal to reach, to make it where it has to be 100 people watching. It's because on Tuesdays, I'm pretty sure we're going to get the 100 every time. And so on Thursdays, it's going to be a little more challenging. So Thursday nights, get to 100, I do a freestyle. Tuesdays, get to 50, and then I do the freestyle. So that's your incentive. So be sure to watch the channel tomorrow, because I'm going to drop a highlight from this video, and I encourage you in the comments to leave what do you think is like the 3 or 4 minute section that's a highlight of this show, because I'll turn it to its own standalone video tomorrow, just like I did with the Robert Spencer interview, and that'll appear on tomorrow's channel. Also on the podcast, be sure to subscribe on iTunes and in the Google Play Store. Backpack Radio is available for free. You can subscribe, so the audio is available right now. The interview I did with Robert Spencer is already on iTunes at backpackradio.com. You can find it, and also just on the iTunes Store or the Google Play Store. It's right there. I'm going to do the same thing with this interview. Take the interview audio, put it up tomorrow. So a lot is going on this channel, and again, it's possible because of the patrons I got. And you patrons, let me know what you think of the first week of this type of programming, and we can work together, because I'd love to hear your ideas. And also on Saturday, I'm going to post a new video, a standalone video or audio, just like I did last Saturday. So a lot's happening, and it's because you guys have been very supportive. So I think that's pretty much it, bro. Are you...
I think so. God bless everyone.
You know what? I'm going to end the show on a very strange note here. I think I'm going to play the final Farrakhan clip we didn't get to.
Yes.
It's 3 minutes and 30 seconds. I'm actually going to end the show with this clip. And can you briefly explain the clip, and then I'm going to end the show playing the clip. That's how we'll end
So
today's show.
this
Go
is the
ahead, bro.
clip showing the ecumenical side, right?
Yeah, can you explain what you mean by ecumenical? I know the term, but not everyone knows the term. Explain this clip. It's Farrakhan with Nasik Asil bin Israel, February 93. Go ahead, break it down, bro.
So some might say I'm using ecumenical a little bit abusively, but I mean it in the sense that he's very warm towards other sects, these other groups, other religious groups, and several times during this discussion we mentioned that while some Israelite groups are very inclusive, the one Western groups, by and large, are mostly very exclusivist in their approach, very hostile to other groups. And so Farrakhan is not like that. The Nation of Islam is not like that. They've always been, maybe not always, but at least for the last couple decades, they've been very, very respectful to other African American groups. And so what we're going to see is Farrakhan in a bit of a warm and loving embrace with a leader, not the leader, a leader from a non-One West Israelite group. He's no longer a member of the group today, but at the time, Nasik Asiel Ben Israel was a member of Ben Ami Carter's group, and he was a very prominent person in that regard at the time. He was sort of like an ambassador, and he would go back and forth between Palestine and the United States and even West Africa. So he was a prominent leader of sorts within that group. And so this is
show the clip.
Yep, Nation of Islam and a Hebrew Israelite leader in a warm embrace.
And this is how we'll end the show because, again, the main question that sparked this show was, what are the differences and similarities between Hebrew Israelites and the Nation of Islam? And here's an example of them hanging out together. Thank you very much, Abu. God bless everyone. I'll see you guys Tuesday, 4 o'clock for the next Backpack Radio Live. Pay attention to social media, and you'll learn what the show is about. Here you go.